I am Flore-Anne. I'm Senior Counselor, G20 Deputy Finance for the G20, G7, and APEC. I'm also the Secretary General of the International Organization of Pension Supervisors, and perhaps more relevant for this interview, I've been for very long the Executive Secretary of the International Network for Financial Education and working at the OECD for the last 20 years. Well, certainly, I'm a macro and microeconomist actually, and also a lawyer. My area of specialty has always been welfare reform from the beginning, and then financial market actually. And then I moved a decade ago or so, working more on the macro level, consumers and financial literacy and financial well-being, which have been the particular focus of some of my work in the last years. Well, I believe one of the main achievements, and as I mentioned, originally I was interested in welfare reform, has been the consideration that consumers and citizens do matter in those welfare reform. And I was really keen, especially as the last global financial crisis started, to make sure that there was a focus from the economic field, but also policymakers on consumers, on citizens, and specifically on the level of financial literacy and how to improve their financial well-being. So it's been a work of more than a decade to make sure that financial literacy and financial well-being was on the radar screen of policymakers and was actually considered a policy tool that could support regulation and financial consumer protection in order to help individuals really making the best choices for their financial well-being. So it's been a challenge from the beginning. I was preaching in the desert for many years, and I'm very pleased now that suddenly it has reached some visibility at the highest level, the global level, the G20 level, for example, obviously the OECD level, but beyond that, that now policymakers are actively implementing those policies. So the journal is a very exciting endeavor. Actually, we started dreaming about having an academic journal specifically on financial literacy and financial well-being with Professor Anna-Maria Guisardi. I think almost a decade ago, we started discussing the fact that in order to move the policy field, we also needed a place where the academia and academics in particular could actually publish the best research. So this journal is really about excellence and making sure that there is a place where authors and the best of the academic people can publish on financial literacy and ultimately on research that can improve financial well-being. So the specificity of the journal is really that first, it is the first journal specifically on this field. The second one I would say is that we really want research to be combined with policies. And by this, I mean really trying to specifically target research that will ultimately improve policies, make them more impactful. So we want more data, more evidence, certainly, on financial literacy and financial well-being, and we want actually articles that will ultimately support policymakers in implementing financial literacy initiatives and programs that will be more useful for citizens and individuals. The field has many challenges. First, I would say I would speak about the challenge that consumers and individuals are facing. And this is a world that is increasingly digitalized, so it has an impact on finance and financial decision, specifically perhaps for vulnerable groups. Second, we are out of the pandemic, but there are also political conflict, and it has an impact on the macroeconomy. Typically, we are facing rising inflation in most of the countries around the globe and rising interest rate after a long period of time where interest rates were very low. So it's a changing environment, and more importantly, it's a very uncertain environment for consumers and retail investors, and making decisions in this context is specifically difficult. There are also considerations of sustainability. So consumers are really faced with a range of choice that they hardly understand, and certainly financial literacy is even more important now than it was in the past because of the uncertainty of the situation, and they will be the first to have to make those decisions. So this is for the general context. Now, specifically as an academic field, I would say that one of the challenges is that from the beginning of my work, we really believed in having more data and specifically more research on what works and what doesn't. And there's been, a lot of work that has been done over the last decade, but there is still more that should be done. So I would say in terms of the challenge, we want more data out there. We want more evaluation of initiatives on financial literacy that have worked, especially in the current context that is specifically challenging for consumers. So the upcoming issue is the first issue. So with Anna-Maria Lusavi, we wanted to make sure that it was covering the field in a way that was reflecting the most, robust research, but also policy. So what we'll be looking at is the importance and impact of financial literacy in a number of fields. So suddenly we do look at the impact of financial literacy in terms of for people to be citizens to make good financial choices, but we are also looking at how financial literacy can help with actually effective use of financial services, effective access to financial services. And then we are looking at the impact on a range of more complex products, such as mortgage, for example, but also cryptocurrencies, which are really the hype these days. And last but not least, we also wanted to give a flavor about implementation, because the journal will be very much also about looking at what is working typically when it comes to implementation. So there will be some article on financial literacy in the schools and their impacts on parents, but also financial literacy in the workplace. So I believe that there are many benefits of the open access. I think number one, for publisher, but also for the financial literacy community and beyond, is the visibility. The fact that it is a digital version means that everybody that has an interest in the field will be able to access those articles. So it provides visibility to the authors typically, but it also enables all of those that are interested in the field to also access the best research. So I think it's really that. And at the same time, they know that it is open access, yes, but the criteria for us is excellence. So they will have access to the most robust and most excellent research in the field. So the ambitions are quite large. As I've said, we've been enthusiastic about having a journal. We are very excited for having it. We really want this to be a place and a platform for more research in the field, making it a more robust academic field. So with more data, with the use of data to develop more evaluation of program and initiatives. And ultimately, again, I will repeat, it's very important for us, the bridge between research and policies. So the ambitions is not only to have an academic journal, but an academic journal that has influence in the policy field, and specifically financial literacy and financial well-being. And of course, what we hope is that the research can ultimately promote financial well-being for individuals and consumers.